Great to hear the conversation happening. Liz, I saw you walking with a Richmond scarf. That makes me very happy. Very happy. Go Tigers. Very good. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see everybody here today. Lots of faces that I know, lots of faces that I don't know. So it's great to see you all here. I'd like to welcome also, we're doing some streaming today too. So there may be some of our council colleagues who are watching this. So welcome to those, and some of our council friends from other councils who are watching this on the streaming and have contacted us this morning to and pay my respects to the Kulin, to the elders past and present and people of the Kulin Nations, and recognise them as the custodians of the land on which we are meeting. Okay, I'd like to say a few welcomes at first, because we have been really fortunate today to get the Victorian Information Commissioner here, Sven Blumel. So for us, I hope I could express my excitement about this. Maybe it's not shared by others, but that's okay. So Sven, thank you for coming along. We're really in development, who's going to share some insights around, probably give some stories about public transparency here at the council. And also I'd like to welcome Sasha Pearson, who's our Governance and FOI Officer. And Sasha's going to share some experiences around FOI, and she's got some help with Brooke Crawford sort of helping her out. So they'll do a bit of a tag team. So welcome Brooke too. Okay, International Right to Know Day. Does anybody know what International Right to Know Day is? Because I didn't. And I'm the Manager of Governance. So let me read this out to you. So International Right to Know Day is celebrated every year on the 28th of September. So given that Saturday and it's grand final, we thought we better do it today. So it's to raise awareness of the importance of open and accountable government and the community's right to access government-held information. This right to access government-held information is essential to transparent and accountable government in a democratic society, by promoting and facilitating greater public participation and scrutiny and supporting better decision making. So, welcome to our Right to Know Day. We're going to explore it a bit more today and see where it takes us. Today's program, we're going to start off by Sven coming up and giving us a presentation and his insights from being the Privacy Information Commissioner, which has only been around for a couple of years, the Commission, hasn't it? So it's relatively new, and as I said at the start, we're really excited because we have a relationship with OVIC, the Office of Victorian Information Commissioner, but we don't have a lot to do with them, so thank God probably. So Sven, I'm going to introduce you in a minute. I just wanted to say a few things about public transparency. It's really in the spotlight. Well, I'll probably retract from that. I've been in local government for 36 years. I couldn't find a really good quote. I love quotes. But whenever I saw it had the words honesty, accountability, trust. If you don't do public transparency well, we lose trust. And to lose trust with our community is kind of, you might as well give the game away, because that's going to cause us a lot of grief. So I put a whole lot of value on public transparency for us as an organisation. It's an important topic. In the future in local government, we're going to be looking at developing a public transparency policy. It's a requirement under the new legislation when that finally comes in. There's lots of issues we deal with as a council that bring transparency into the spotlight, like dealing with the Privacy and Data Protection Act, the Freedom of Information Act. We see increases of numbers in FOI applications, more awareness around privacy. We've got an educated and smart community these days who know their rights and often ask us about the information that they can get. So it's a really important space for us as an organisation, for us as a governance team to manage. So I've set the scenarios for us. So now I'm going to introduce Sven. I'm just going to read his bio here first. Sven Blumel was appointed as the inaugural Victorian Information Commissioner in September 2017. Prior to his current role, Sven served as Western Australian Information Commissioner for 8 years. During that time, he was also a member of the State Records Commission alongside the Auditor General, the Ombudsman and a records management expert appointed by the Governor. Before 2009, Sven held senior positions in the Western Australian Public Sector Commission, the Department of the Premier and Cabinet in Western Australia, and the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department in Canberra. Sven has also served as President of the Institute of Public Administration in Western Australia for 3 years. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sven Blumenthal and welcome him to the microphone. So thank you, Sven.
Well, thank you very much, Phil, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the City of Kingston for the opportunity to be here today. It's an absolute pleasure. So, my office, the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner, or OVIC, is the primary regulator for information privacy, information security and freedom of information in Victoria. So we have oversight of the Privacy and Data Protection Act as well as the Freedom of Information Act. So it's a real pleasure here to celebrate the Right to Know Day, which is marked around the world by raising awareness of the community's rights to access government-held information. And it's often said that information is the lifeblood of society. And in my view, having access to information is as crucial to citizens' ability to participate meaningfully in society as other important rights, such as the right to freedom of expression and the right to vote. So Right to Know Day is more than about the right of access. It reinforces the importance of open and accountable government as the foundation of our democratic society. It also notes the need for transparency to build trust in government, to facilitate greater public participation and scrutiny, and to support better decision making. Today I'll be talking about why government openness is important, the state of FOI in Victoria, and what my office is doing to facilitate the release of information and to support agencies in their FOI work. So let's begin by talking about more broadly about the importance of transparency, whether through FOI or through other instruments. Now, we have a number of mechanisms available to us to scrutinise and keep our executive accountable: parliamentary oversight, council meetings, judicial review. But another one of those mechanisms is the Freedom of Information Act and the associated process. Now, there's little doubt that information is a valuable asset, particularly in this digital age. It brings power to those who control it, and the conditions under which individuals and groups are entitled and able to access and control information affects how our institutions function. Therefore, a key part of FOI is to help level the playing field and redistribute the balance of power by protecting the public's right to access information. It enables citizens, the media, advocacy groups and others to access information to scrutinise decisions and actions taken by government, and indeed to influence those decisions and actions in the first place. It also ensures that citizens have the necessary information to enable them to make meaningful and informed decisions about the politicians, candidates and policies that they vote for. Openness of information is a vital and key pillar of government accountability and, importantly, for the long-term health of our democracy. Our FOI legislation recognises that government is designed to serve citizens, not the other way around. Government does not exist for its own benefit, but just to serve and govern for the public good. Of course, ensuring open and accountable government through FOI or other mechanisms is not always as easy or as straightforward as we'd like it to be. Like many other jurisdictions around the world, our FOI regime here in Victoria faces many challenges, and I'll just go through a few of them now. So, the Victorian FOI provides individuals with the right to access information and documents held by state government agencies, statutory authorities, public bodies and, of course, local government. The Act was created to promote openness, accountability and transparency in the public sector, with its object being to extend as far as possible the community's right to access documents in the possession of the Victorian state and local governments. But this is not an absolute right. The Act states that this right of access is limited only by exceptions and exemptions necessary for the protection of essential public interests and the private and business affairs of persons to whom the information relates. Now, importantly, therefore, the Act contains a number of exemptions to account for situations where the public interest in transparency is outweighed by some other valid, legitimate public interest, such as the protection of personal privacy or the preservation of the integrity of legal proceedings. In releasing information under freedom of information, agencies, including local councils, must balance different public interests while promoting accountability and transparency, all within the legislative obligations of the FOI Act. This is not easy, and I'm sure many of you in the audience can attest to that. Now, the FOI regime in Victoria particularly has faced some particular challenges since it was first introduced in 1982 as one of the first FOI Acts in Australia. Now, one of the most significant challenges is just the sheer volume of requests that are made to government agencies. In 2017-18, there were almost 40,000 formal FOI requests made in Victoria, and that was an 8% increase over the previous year. And that compares to a mere 4,700 requests in 1984-85, which was one of the first full years of operation of the Act. Anecdotally, it also seems to me and my colleagues that requests are becoming increasingly complex and large, perhaps as a consequence of the vast amount of information that government now stores. It increases every year. Now, interestingly, Victoria actually receives the highest number of requests of all the states and territories. Perhaps this can be explained in part by the fact that we have what's called a pull model of FOI, where it relies on individuals asking for information. Some other jurisdictions in Australia have developed a push model of FOI, or right to information, in which government bodies are expected to publish information proactively and routinely release information independently of FOI information access and disclosure rights. So we in Victoria have not adopted such a model, but my office strongly encourages the release of information outside the Act wherever possible, and I'll be talking about that in practical terms shortly. Now, another challenge that agencies face in administering the Act is the reduction of timeframes to process a request from 45 to 30 days, the result of amendments to the Act in 2017. Again, those of you here who regularly deal with FOI will know that only too well. Now, those amendments also introduced additional mandatory consultation and notification requirements in certain circumstances. And agencies have reported, as part of our 2017-18 annual reporting process, that those requirements have significantly increased administrative workloads, where we are aware of that. More broadly, there's been criticism of the way the FOI Act in Victoria is administered, including a 2012 report by the Victorian Auditor General pointing to the, quote, Victorian public sector's systemic failure to support the public's right to timely, comprehensive and accurate information, as well as to more recent media reports highlighting an alleged culture of secrecy in Victoria's FOI regime. I'm pleased to say that the 2017 reforms have, I think, gone a long way to ensuring stronger oversight and making the system more robust. It's also something that we at OVIC have experienced firsthand in our work of conducting FOI reviews and dealing with FOI complaints. For example, sometimes we do see agencies taking an overly the basis that it would be embarrassing or inconvenient. Organisational culture also presents a different type of challenge for FOI. Apart from the operational aspects of administering the Act, some agencies seem to hold the view that FOI process. That is, if the work and decisions of public servants and council officers are exposed to the community, those public servants and officers will stop providing the frank and fearless advice on which good government depends for fear of that information being released. But I think this view is inconsistent with the integrity of our public service at state and local government level and the intelligence, impartiality and professionalism. Are we more likely to want to do our best if we know our work is subject to scrutiny? And I consider that local government faces its own unique challenges in this space. You are the closest level of government to the public. You have a very direct relationship with residents of your cities. And balancing this can sometimes be difficult when a decision have the same resources as larger state government agencies. And I'm sure some of you here wear 2 or more hats as part of your role in this space. Although having already said that the 2017 reforms, I think, go a long way in terms of rectifying that. But the perception can undermine the community's trust and engagement with government and can have an adverse impact on government accountability and transparency. So it's imperative that our information access schemes here in mention. So it's OVIC's vision that by working with us, agencies can provide improved outcomes for applicants in terms of timeliness, convenience, and on FOI mechanisms, with the FOI mechanism really used as a last resort. Public access to government data via the DataVic platform and open directory. So the purpose of DataVic access policy is to enable public access to government data to support research and education and enhance evidence-based privacy of individuals. Now, so far I've touched on the challenges of FOI in Victoria, and while there's certainly work to do to improve things, organisations that makes it easier to do the right thing in providing access to government information. One way that agencies can do this is by identifying other methods to provide access outside of the Act without the need for any kind of formal request. Now, the Act, the documents they seek outside the Act, and this actually technically includes agencies to have respect for individuals' privacy at the front of their minds in making such decisions. After all, I don't just it's in addition to making information available to the public promptly and inexpensively. It can be a simpler and more efficient process than responding to a request under the Act. It can reduce agency workload. Now, our experience at OVIC has been that informal release can improve outcomes for the community substantially, as intended by Parliament in passing the FOI Act, and also enable agencies to better focus their own resources. So we encourage executives to approach requests for information with the mindset of, can we facilitate this? Can we make this available? Why would we want to ask someone to have to go through FOI to get it? And this will involve engaging and communicating directly and meaningfully with the individual making the request. It's all right to talk to them. And as I was speaking with Phil at the start of the session here, one of my observations is that in many cases, local government actually does the proactive disclosure for information relating to interests of rate. And a request is complex, where it involves high stakes, where it requires a fine balancing of different valid public interests. In such matters, the FOI access regime and review process will be the appropriate avenue. This is really what they're designed for. But the vast majority of requests continue to be made by members of the public for access to their own information. While these types of requests are not without their complexity in some cases, the statistics demonstrate that there are considerable gains to be made by agencies proactively identifying opportunities for routine or administrative release. Where a request does have to go through FOI, we continue to encourage agencies to adopt a more flexible and less technical approach. Don't start with the proposition of, how can we find it exempt? Start with the proposition of, why not? Why not give it out? There may be a information reasonably, but there are still some others that attempt to find loopholes and adopt an overly technical approach to the Act, which only serves to undermine government transparency where we want to go. A second way of achieving the objects of the Act is to release information proactively, not just now, of course, again, I realise that many agencies, particularly in local government, already do a lot of this, and that is commendable. Or there might be information being made available. And my office supports and encourages such proactive release schemes wherever appropriate, and I'm confident that, as with informal release, proactive release can lead to positive outcomes and significant benefits, not just for the wider community, but even for the agencies who are engaged in it. Now, of course, doing that they hold, and of course that is a mammoth task. We've been working with agencies to address this in a number of ways, including promoting the use of information asset registry, a security framework which many of you will be familiar with, which is also administered by my office. So there are some great examples of proactive release schemes in Victoria already. I've already mentioned DataVic, and there are others. But I believe there's still greater. Now, both informal and proactive release requires agencies to consider their approach to releasing information and to open government, and this is something that my office will fully support. the last few months, and that is the development of FOI professionals. December. The standards clarify the obligations on agencies for how they go at Right to Know Day and, of course, our own FOI Act. The standards also aim to make the FOI process more accessible and compatible with communications and almost 40 years ago. And we have to make sure that access to information is not hindered by this shift to a digital world. Arguably, we'll continue on working with agencies to develop guidance materials in this regard. We're going to be hosting an information session on the standards in supporting you as the standards come into force. If you're interested, have a look at our website, ovic.vic.gov.au. Another great way to follow us is through our Twitter feed at ovic_au, because every time we have something new or we have an event on or we have training places available, that's the place to find them. So at ovic_au. So I'll now just briefly cover my office's training, education and awareness activities. So one key initiative that my office undertakes is to support agencies in their FOI work by providing free training to agency staff. We have several different layers of that training and all agency staff are welcome. We hold them quite regularly, so if you're interested, have a look at our website, get in touch with us and register. Which I think indicates that there is a large unmet need and we do as much as we can. So get in there early. If it's sold out, you might be able to join a waiting list as well. But we do hold these very, very regularly and they are all free. We even feed you on the full day courses. We also, speaking of things at which we feed people, we also hold lunchtime seminars as part of our information access series. These are for processes such as particular exemptions, particular sections, working with us on reviews and complaints and so on. Again, feel free to register your interest on the website or have a look at our Twitter. And publishing de-identified review decisions made by my office. They're published on my office's website as well as on Austly. It's an important part of my function as Commissioner to promote understanding by agencies and the public of the FOI Act and its objects, as well as to promote transparency of our regulatory role and ensuring consistency in our decisions. And then finally, I'd just like to briefly mention some of the things today, and indeed some of you were quite aware of what we have been doing, and I'm really pleased to hear that. So we've published various materials on our website, blog posts containing top tips for agencies as well as applicants when processing or making an FOI request. We held a very well received public forum on Tuesday exploring community attitudes towards FOI and whether these are at odds with how the FOI Act is actually administered today. We were actually joined by some special guests from across the FOI space from many different perspectives, from academia, the media, government agencies and oversight bodies, and we had a really interesting discussion there. Again, it's available through our Twitter page. We've just launched a new short 3-minute video for applicants called How to Lodge an FOI Request. It's available on our website. You may want to point applicants to that. You may want to link to it from your website, whatever you want to do. It's designed to make it really, really simple for people who don't know how government works, don't know information holdings and those sorts of things, to have a look at this video, 3 minutes, and it explains how you can go about accessing government information in Victoria. We've also, just a couple of days ago, I think it was Tuesday morning, published a report on a project that my office conducted in collaboration with Monash University, researching the cultural and procedural barriers to information release under the FOI Act. We've written a blog post on this report, again, on our website, and you can link to the full report itself. I'd encourage you all to have a look at that. It provides a really valuable insight into how FOI is actually administered in Victoria. So, increasing public distrust, and now more than ever, we need to find ways to build and enhance public trust in government and its institutions, and maintaining the public's right to access information is one way to do this. The answer to the declining level of trust access to information. Doing this outside the FOI Act has many benefits. I think I've covered those. information, but as custodians. And as custodians, we have a responsibility to make sure that the right information is available to the right people at the right time and via the right avenues. So thank you once again to the City of Kingston and to all of you here for joining us in person as well as online to celebrate Right to Know Day. We're very, very pleased to play a part in that. And I encourage government information, promoting government openness and accountability. Every single one of us can, and I would say should, make a difference. Thank you. I think we have time for some questions. Broadcast, yeah, so we'll just hold on, here we go.
Yes, hello, Ross here. You mentioned that the FOI is all state government. Like each state government's created. I always thought it was like a Commonwealth government body.
I think also in 1982, I think Victoria followed shortly after the Federal Act. And the idea is that the Commonwealth Act applies to the information held by the Commonwealth government and the Commonwealth public sector. And then each state and territory some are called Right to Information Acts, Right to Know Acts, those sorts of things. And they then apply to that particular state in its state and local government entities. Yeah, so, and when I said earlier that Victoria receives more than any other state, all of this is actually online. We do sort of a comparative study, myself and my counterparts, which is led by New South Wales. They publish those stats. Victoria actually gets more than the Commonwealth, which is interesting. Yeah. Mind you, the Commonwealth doesn't have local government, so yeah. Yes, we have one. Oh, we have two over here.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Why is Victoria, I can't remember, I've interchanged with the push-pull you said about some states. Why is it that we're different?
About 10 years ago, they were all pull models. So the idea was simply there's an act, it relies on people making applications, and then you have to give it out unless it's exempt. So that was pretty much the standard across every Australian jurisdiction. And then in the order of 10 years ago, or in the last 10 years, three jurisdictions, the Commonwealth, in terms of legislation. In terms of practice, I think the experience has been mixed. States that have a push model, you haven't suddenly seen the need for FOI disappear, or you haven't suddenly seen government being super transparent about everything. They are, I think, a substantial improvement, but and it needs all of those sorts of things. So in Victoria, yeah, we're first generation. Until about 2 years ago, we were really old first generation. 2 years ago, substantial changes. Still first generation in concept, but much stronger.
Hi, I'm Kesha. Being a journalist and applying through freedom of information to get our information.
This person's summary and so on. Now, I think that'll always be the case. That. And of course, based on the reputation of saying, well, you know what? They're actually really good, and I've seen them give out stuff away.
Information that we may release is used?
It is a little bit, there's elements of good faith and so on. Release could endanger someone, then it's going to be exempt. You know, classic case of, someone's certainly would be one of the things that potentially violent. I'm not saying that shits on liability, just means, we all want to make the best possible decisions. We don't want to encourage or facilitate that sort of behaviour, clearly. So we do need to be aware of those risks. But the issue of actual liability down the track is different. Yeah. Just goes to show that none of this is easy. You know, and we get that at OVIC. We get that people who make FOI decisions and administer the FOI process in agencies, it's not an easy job. You know, is there public interest in disclosure of this document? That's not straightforward. Privacy, balancing privacy and transparency, it's doable. It's not easy. You know, this is a professional role that people have to bring really good skills to. Yeah. And
Can I just ask one question? What I often see with us dealing with FOI and privacy matters is sometimes a defensiveness and a fear, and I can understand that. How do you change the culture from defensive and fear to being proactive?
So you mean defensive and fear on behalf of the agency?
On behalf of the agency, even sometimes on behalf of the individual who doesn't understand probably the FOI process very well. And so we recognise there's a training element that we need to get involved in and raising awareness. But there is a first mindset sometimes of defence and fear. And so often that can play out in different ways.
Yeah, and that's, I think, probably one word. I'll do two words. I'll start with one, which is leadership, which is that I think it's really important for the managers, executives, and particularly senior executives in an agency to keep sending that message to staff to say, this is what we stand for. This is an important part of our values as the city, is to make things like this available, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's at times embarrassing, which will happen all the time, and you're not alone in that. It'll happen to any agency that holds information and deals with the public. But the more that leadership comes out, the better. That Monash survey I mentioned identifies senior leadership as the single most important element in changing that culture. If you have a senior leadership that genuinely says and acts on that belief of transparency and I get that there will be times that I, as the senior executive, will have a bad day because of what we've released, but that's part of the deal. Then I think you will start increasing that culture. So that was my one word. Second word is communication. That's probably that's part of it obviously, but also communicating out towards your community and those sorts of things. In answer to your question earlier about dealing with the media unit, dealing with journalists, dealing with citizens in all of that, the more you do that and demonstrate that you're actually living and breathing this, the more people start trusting you. And I think I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Lots of great messages out of that. As I said at the start, if you had told me that we were going to have the Information Commission come out to the City of Kingston, I would have laughed. But I have to thank Kelly for doing all that. I'll tell you the story later on how we got Sven here, but really fantastic to see you. We hope to develop a relationship between us as local government, City of Kingston and OVIC, so thank you again for your presentation. All right, our next presenter is Jonathan Goodman. So for those of you who I'm sure everybody knows Jonathan, maybe people who are watching the stream don't know Jonathan. Jonathan's our General Manager of Planning and Development. Jonathan's going to come and share some insights around public transparency, probably share some stories with us. Jonathan's area is one of those areas which we often have to deal with in terms of FOI and privacy. Jonathan deals with a lot of the regulatory areas, planning, local laws, building, a few others. It's interesting how a lot of our stuff comes through those channels, and so I know Jonathan's got great insights into that, so I welcome Jonathan to come and share those with us. So thanks, Jonathan.
I think in the scheme of Phil's life in local government and life more generally, this is clearly a very exciting week. But I will say that it is really terrific from a very small department's perspective to see such a cross-section of people here and no doubt on the stream as well. This is not necessarily subject matter that everyone can easily get excited about, but it is really something about our culture that we come together and support the governance team now. And again, acknowledging Kelly, particularly in putting today together, she would really value the fact that there is such a cross-section of people here today. Beyond today, go and talk, have conversations. It's important people get to know Sasha, Phil and Kelly around the work that they're doing. I wanted to push you a bit, to use Sven's comment about, you know, how we've always done things, and one of the things that we're having a bit of a discussion about within our division at the moment. But I wanted to kind of make it meaningful around our customer first. So I really wanted to kind of get you now to get into the headspace of me as a service provider to our customers. I want you to think about our customers from the perspective, this is just a small snapshot of our city. So you've got people working in factories, you've got people living in homes of all sorts of different ages. You've got a new, this is Moorabbin by the way, for those who don't know, you've got a new apartment building. You've got the parks crew, you know, turning up and doing tree pruning along street trees. Victoria Police are in this photo as well. Many different customers that we have just in this snapshot alone. At any given time, any of these people might want different services from us. But today I wanted to focus very particularly on one of the services that we provide, which is our statutory building service. I really apologise because I hate doing this with lots of words on a slide, and I probably won't read it to you because I trust that will be possible for most people, apologising for the size of the text. So I'll let you have a read, and I'm going to come back to this in a second. Leave it up for a second in case people still going. This is where John's team literally start their interaction. So John is our MBS for those who don't know John, but John's team start a lot of their interactions with our customers with respect to their obligations under the Building Act. This will be more meaningful in a sec, hopefully. What does the process look like? So if you're a building surveyor for the City of Kingston, this happens every day. Someone rings up and says there's an issue, maybe in a house, maybe in a factory, maybe in a retail business, and increasingly we've got resources to do more and more proactive inspections. Generally, John's team need to give 48 hours notice before they go and do an inspection of a house, of a factory, of anything they might need to go and have a look at. They visit the site and they're provided access by a person when they get there. Generally, their work requires them to go into buildings, obviously to have a look at the condition that they find the buildings in. They'll take, a lot of people in the room probably do this, they may take photos, do file notes. They come back to the office to complete the paperwork. More and more we're doing that on site with our laptops and our technology, but you have to do the paperwork. And then they'll make a decision, and going back to that legislation, either to issue a notice, always issue a notice first, or an order, and then an order to the owner. I want to show you some of the situations that they confront on a daily. I did all this, by the way, with Freya's in the room. This is all done by myself today, no comms assistance. I do apologise. I did that myself. But they will go and inspect swimming pools. This is super topical for our sector at the moment. We have to develop a register starting November if the rules and regulations come out as proposed. 7,000 swimming pools in Kingston. So you can imagine the volume of work that's going to flow in over the next 6 months to register swimming pools. I reckon when I started planning, we had very few balconies in Kingston. People were mainly building at ground level. Very few balconies with barbecues. No buildings with combustible cladding. So you can imagine the correlation between those two things in the current environment. I'm told, and I'm certainly not an expert in this space, if you walked into an industrial building, this is the kind of, or a commercial council building, this is the kind of fire system that you would see if you were a building surveyor and need to have a look at. And then finally, this is certainly not best practice, but as a city with significant industrial buildings and older industrial buildings, particularly in Moorabbin, by no means is this an example we wouldn't run into occasionally in Kingston, or on the other side of that door, packaging and boxes and the fire exits blocked. So they would be real life scenarios for our building surveyors on any given day. Now I want you to read the highlighted bits of the same thing you read before. And I might just reinforce a couple of points. Notice to be BA is about safety and emergency services have not been maintained. So everyone in the room will understand what the potential complications associated with that might be. Danger to life, self-evident. Health and safety of a member of the public or of any person using the building, the land or place to any property. But I want you to keep that in the back of your minds as I flick. Our city is changing. So the graph on the screen shows how our city is changing in terms of our housing stock. And what this, I apologise, I'll do both, but the degree to which our rental population is growing. And I think everyone will be aware that housing in this part of Melbourne and in Melbourne generally is becoming a lot more unaffordable. There are generations young they are occupying, so I think the story's now probably coming together for most of you. It begs the question about who has. In a lot of instances now in our city, the owner of the property is not the person occupying the system's, defective because it's beeping, or that the owner of the property won't be aware that an exit door's been shut, but we issue it to the owner. The conversation that we're about to start having with Kelly particularly is around a policy to look at whether or not we can avoid FOI and whether or not, in terms of pushing information out, we should be making our point known to the occupiers of the building. I know there's one lawyer in the room. I think there's probably only one or two lawyers in the room against Steph. But you can imagine that complexity of legislation outside the Building Act that governs our other responsibilities, obligations for the people who are running the business in the factory. There are all sorts of other government agencies looking at that, and if we don't tell the occupier that we've issued an order asking the owner to do something, I wonder where our legal obligation now sits in the future. I understand Kingston could be the first council to look at proactively putting out our building order. It is something that our division, and as was said by Phil, we're really active in this space in terms of regulation. Our division is considering, and I hope by giving you that example, you really do start to appreciate that there are a lot of things that we do that we've just followed what the legislation says about that owner, and maybe not questioned whether or not from a customer perspective there's anyone else who might be materially impacted by the way in which we go about making our decisions. I did all these brackets. But the bottom bit I think is really important around what our absolute purpose for Customer First is, and it is around the customer. And in a world that's rapidly changing in terms of housing affordability, you can already get a sense of just how different the definition of customer was in 2011 to what it will be in, the next time we do a census. I'm sure there'll be more and more people renting in Kingston. I wanted to try and give you a real example today around how we might need to think about some things differently. I'm happy, I don't know if there is time, but I'm happy to take one or two questions if people have them. Try to start now.
Jonathan, thanks for those insights and that example. That would be one example of thousands I reckon he could give us. From us, from a governance team, the fact that we important, and I just really want to thank you for your support in that. You did mention at the start that I'd be very excited about this. The only thing that might rival my excitement is the grand final on Saturday. But they go moving along. We now have Sasha Pearson. Now, I'm very excited about introducing Sasha because I want her to be seen by the organisation as our FOI officer. So Sasha's got a really important role in our team in terms of FOI. She basically runs it. She knows it back to front. She knows what's required in FOI. It's a really challenging role. You have to balance the needs of the organisation with the legislation, with the requirement for information that's being asked for. People often come to her and talk to her about why it's happening, what's happening. She has these conversations with people, and I listen to them all the time, and she does a great job. She often doesn't get noticed for it. It's not her only part of her role. She does lots of other things around governance, but I see it as a really important role for us as an organisation, and she does it better than anybody I've ever seen do FOI. So I know we might be having some technical glitches here before we get Sasha on board.
There's a preview of Saturday, Phil.
Oh, where from? Look, as I said before, the space of FOI and privacy is emerging. The privacy and data learning a lot about how to apply that and how to do it. I think Jonathan gave us some really great insights about some of the conversations that need to happen around the organisation around this stuff. I also said at the start of the meeting that government legislation, and so that will mean a lot of discussions with lots of teams across the organisation. Public transparency is not only owned by governance; it's all of. To start at the top, I'm going to be talking about how important public transparency is for us. I know it can be challenging at times, and it can be really continue to have a level of trust with the community that we can hold our hands up and say, we've got a good relationship with our community. So lots of things in all that. Hopefully I've been able to. I'm going to be joined by Brooke Crawford, who's also part of the Customer First project. Sasha's going to talk a little bit about FOI, and also with her and Brooke talk about a recent experience about FOI. So I'm going to hand over to these guys. So welcome Sasha and Brooke.
Hello everyone. I want to start by thanking Sven for generously coming to Kingston and giving up his time to speak to us, and for Jonathan's insights into what transparency looks like for us here. Looks like at Kingston. These are our inquiries that came in for the last financial year. They didn't all eventuate into formal requests. But you can see the red areas are our planning and development division, which Jonathan's responsible for. And that's where we see a large concentration of inquiries, requests for access to documents type areas. But it demonstrates that the laws that govern, and we do have to balance the need for privacy and other reasons why we might need to think about withholding access. Decisions of council with the need to protect certain documents where it's your personal information or business information, for example. And I wanted now to talk about the more personal aspect. Sven touched on consultation requirements of freedom of information. That's where, when I'm dealing with a request, affects you. So I just wanted to introduce Brooke here. Brooke, I sent you an email recently. There was a rather unusual request that we don't see a lot of regarding an employee matter. So I emailed Brooke. Can you tell me how you felt?
Sure. Just tilt this down. Not as tall as other people. Anyway, so I recently received an email from Sasha, and I'm sure if you've ever received an email like this, you'll know what I'm about to say. So when I opened it up, there was a lot of words in it, so my brain did a quick scan and picked up key words like FOI, you have been identified, and a whole list of dot points that freaked me out. And I think that's probably when the red mist of real panic set in, because I didn't know what I was actually looking at, if I'd been accused of anything. Came flooding back in a weird montage, and I couldn't decipher what was about bullying and what was about FOI and privacy. So yeah, I panicked a little bit, I've got to say. But I think the main point is, firstly, we are each other's internal customers, so we need to be mindful about messages that we're giving each other. But also, a big part of Customer First is about simplifying messages and making things simple to understand, and really actually getting the point across that you wanted to make. So I think there's I would say that layered on top of all of this montage going on in my head, it was the CEO's first week, the new CEO's first week. So I was quickly kind of putting together a presentation in my head about defending myself, which is really difficult when you don't know what the actual thing is. So yeah, just a little, so what I'm hearing is that transparency is definitely a good thing. An email like that, don't panic, just contact Sasha and she'll tell you what it's all about and talk you through it.
Thanks, Brett. Brett, one more question before we go.
Yep.
So you did come to see me after you got this email. Can you just go through maybe how I dealt with that and how you felt after we had a chat?
Yeah. So as I said, the email had a lot of words in it, so I think it's fair to say I was in full flight mode when I came around to sit quite close to Sasha, so I was, after my hands in the air moment, went round and said, actually, can you just explain to me what this is? And then Sasha very calmly sat me down and explained that it's actually not about me, which I was shocked about. Why, firstly. And also talked me through the actual process in place to make sure that I understood exactly what the matter was about and how I was involved in it, which actually was a very tiny part and it was fine. So that's how.
So I have to consult with people, staff inside council and outside. So I often get this reaction of, what have I done or what have I been accused of? So my message is, if you've ever got any concerns, just come and speak to us, whether it's on freedom of information or privacy or any sort of integrity issues. We're on the 5th floor in this building. Pop in or give us a call. Another example I wanted to talk about was, sometimes we all deal with difficult customers, and our instinct might be, when they've been difficult, to put the shutters down. Recently I had a call put through from customer service from someone who believed they had some rights to some information, but they were being refused by that department. And that was partly because some difficult conversations they'd had. So in governance, we've talked about us being unbiased. So, okay, take someone new who doesn't have the background or perhaps a negative opinion to go in with, to think about what they're really asking. And I enlisted Jackie, who's our customer advocate, details of one of our staff there, and arrange for that customer to come in and meet and discuss the matter further. So, you know, even if someone's been difficult in the past, we're still under an obligation to deal with them fairly and transparently. So that just about wraps it up, really. Just to reiterate, please come and see us if you have questions on privacy, freedom of information, websites, and also I would, as Sven has mentioned, I would recommend visiting the OVIC website. There's plenty of resources there. Thank you.
Any questions of Sasha? you can talk to us at any time. So. Okay. Well, I stand between us and lunch. I'm standing here very proud. It's not. This sort of space is not one that you often talk about or think about. We do all the time in governance. We have made a concerted effort to try and get messages out to our organisation. So today was a start. I have to really thank Sven for coming out today. It really lifts the profile for us. So I hope all our colleagues at other councils who might be watching this stream can see the recording of this, and other colleagues in our council might be able to see a recording of this. I cannot thank you enough, Sven, for coming out. Now that I know who you are, I hope I can get a direct line to your office. But fortunately enough, we haven't had to talk to Avik too much. We have done a few times, but we look forward to continuing a relationship with you. So thank you for coming out. Also, I want to thank Jonathan. As I said before, Jonathan got some great insights into how things should work. When Jonathan was talking about one example, and it was one piece of legislation, the last count we had, I think local government deals with 120 pieces of legislation. That's a hell of a lot of legislation that we deal with, and each one has its own complexities and issues to deal with. And you know, even Kesh's question before about media stuff, you know, there's so many impacts in this area. Anybody, if you want to talk to us about these issues, or if you've got an issue that you're facing and need to get some more information, please. No, well done. When we were talking at the start of the week, or last week actually, about what we would do as a presentation, we suggested that telling a story might be the most powerful way of doing it. So thank you for embracing that. I think the story is a really powerful way. Feedback from people. You know, the thing I took from what Brooke was saying was we're always looking at ways to improve that in our communication. Sven highlighted communication as one of the key things to changing the culture. So we'd love to get some feedback on how you think we do the process and how we can improve it. Organisational Governance Coordinator. Kelly's only been with us close to 4 months now, I think. The story goes, Kelly went to do training at OVIC one day. She turned up at OVIC on a Monday morning. It's a day off normally Monday, and so she changed days to go to the training. Got there and the training got cancelled. She didn't know about that, so she was quite pissed off. Sorry, Kel. I think it's a great story. So she comes back and says, I think I've got to let OVIC know I'm not happy, so she sends an email off. OVIC come back, tell me if I'm wrong, but OVIC said, look, sorry about that, but we did notify people, but we'd like you to come and have a coffee with the Commissioner. I think this is how it went. And Kel sent an email back saying, better still, can you send the Commissioner out here for a right to know? I said, Kelly, there's no chance you're going to get the Commissioner to come out here for a right to know day. Next day she gets an email, the Commissioner's happy to come out and talk to us. So, Kelly, well done. There you go, amazing. So look, thank you everyone for turning up today. Hopefully you got something out of it. To our people in streaming land, we'll have a recording of this, so we'll try and get that out to people. Yeah, public transparency, here we go. We're on a journey. So thank you for coming. Please join us for lunch. Thanks, guys.